Thanks everybody for coming. Today we're going to be talking about some of the UX patterns that exist inside of your organizations on the enterprise desktop. This chat's called Beyond the Chat Window. We will be talking a lot about the different ways that you can introduce AI into the enterprise desktop. Before we get started, my name is Bob Myers. I'm the Chief Product Officer at interop.io. If you're not familiar with our company, we help enterprises, typically in capital markets, that have large amounts of internal and external applications, build those into enterprise platforms. We're FDC3 compliant from a platform perspective, and we're maintainers on the FDC3 standard, and most recently on the Agentic AI Foundation. We're silver members of that organization. I'm a relatively new joiner to Interop. Prior to joining the firm, I spent 15 years working on business intelligence and visualization solutions, also in the enterprise. But the last year and a half since I've joined Interop, I've been working with our clients, so largest firms in capital markets, really thinking about how we can introduce AI effectively and safely into their end business users' experience. And so those conversations with clients, as well as the way that we implement open source standards alongside of our platform, are what the takeaways from today's conversation are going to be based on. So there's two worlds really happening right now in the enterprise desktop. The first world is AI lives in one place. It's typically a copilot or an assistant experience. And there's an interesting stat here from a late 2025 article or research paper that 86% of enterprise AI spend is currently on copilots or assistants. So that's great. These are typically RAG-based or retrieval augmented generation-based copilots. They can answer questions maybe on your policies or your internal knowledge bases, but there's a whole nother world that's happening in the enterprise. For our clients, there's usually around 20 to 30 applications on the enterprise desktop at any given time, and that number can be much higher. This is where the work is actually getting done today. Users move between these applications, they're context rich, and today, typically, AI has no awareness of that desktop or the work that's being done inside of those applications. So if you start to think about these two worlds coming together, does the chat experience that typically represents AI absorb or subsume the platform? Or does the platform absorb the AI? Or are there more patterns that are emerging that we should think about? So before we go any further, I want to talk about some of the building blocks that we're seeing today from an open source standards perspective. So the first one I want to talk about is MCP, or Model Context Protocol. If you're not familiar with this standard, think of this as a way to connect any application or data set to a large language model. This is a universal connector. It's very popular right now. It's very helpful in terms of adding context to your chat experience. The next standard I want to talk about is MCP apps. This is actually the first extension to the MCP protocol that has happened. It was released earlier this year, and this is really interesting. It returns interactive responses into a chat experience. So we're not just talking about data at this point, we're talking about rich interactive applications. The next standard, I'm guessing most people here are familiar with FDC3, Financial Desktop Connectivity and Collaboration Consortium. Man, that's a mouthful every time. This standard is very helpful for introducing AI into the enterprise desktop. It's metadata rich. It's got natural language descriptions of applications and what they do. It's got well-defined intents or actions that applications can take, and it handles a definition of context that those applications can handle as well. And I'm going to spend just a tiny bit of time talking about A2UI, or Agent to UI. This is a new protocol, actually from Google, and this is, I think, the direction of travel that we're going to start seeing in the enterprise desktop. AI can actually create, off of a predefined component library, a custom or bespoke application to meet a user's specific needs. These are the building blocks. Everything you're going to see from this point in terms of the patterns that I'm seeing at enterprise deployment of AI are based on these standards. So let's talk about some patterns and what's actually happening in the real world. I remember the first time that I demoed this pattern, which I'll call pull to chat, was probably April of 2025. I was using an off-the-shelf chat interface. I'm guessing it was probably Claude at that time, hooked up to a bunch of internal applications via the MCP standard. So this was a CRM, a portfolio analytics application, a research application. And this was pretty magical. This blending together of data from multiple applications into a chat experience, the first time you see it, you understand that you're never going to do work the same way again. It's incredibly powerful, and it starts to really make you think about, well, maybe chat would be the place that all work happens going forward. Here's the thing. Demoware and the first time you see something do not actually reflect the realities of production deployment of systems or the way that users actually leverage the desktop applications that you roll out. There are some cracks that immediately start to form in the pull-to-chat paradigm. The first one is trust. The users must validate the data. This talk is not going to be about evaluations of LLMs or some of the more sophisticated practices that you can deploy. But unless you're actually implementing those types of practices, the user's on the hook to go back to the source applications and actually validate that that information is accurate. So while that looks really cool and sexy in a demo, you're very quickly toggling back and forth the way you were previously. The second issue is cognitive overload. We have a real problem with AI. It is a fast producer of content, and we as humans are slow consumers of that information. As I mentioned, I spent the first 15 years of my career focused on business intelligence and reporting applications, and that entire practice is around taking massive amounts of data and turning them into visualizations that can be progressively discovered by users so they can get insights out of large amounts of data. Pulling information into chat and delivering a wall of text immediately breaks down some of those UX patterns, and it's a very bad experience for a user. If you imagine working for an entire day just reading walls of text, there's no progressive discovery. This actually breaks down very quickly. And the last issue is an action gap. It's one thing to get information delivered to you in a chat experience. It's another thing to go take action inside of those applications that you're working in. Opening a trade ticket, putting a note into a CRM system, sending an email. So again, I think pull-to-chat is a very magical experience the first time you see it. I call it the blender. It pulls data from multiple different sources together into a nice work product, but it has some real limitations in the real world. The second pattern I think is really powerful, and this one's all about turning a large language model or a chat interface into a universal remote for your existing applications that exist on the enterprise desktop. How is this possible? We're using a couple of open source standards. One is FDC3, which again is a metadata-rich standard that describes what applications exist, what they do, and what context they can handle. We're using MCP to wrap those API endpoints from an FDC3 implementation and make those available to a large language model. So on the screen here, we're just going to show a quick flow of what this looks like. Show me client A's Tesla position and the latest research. In this case, instead of pulling data into the chat interface, the large language model is actually going to identify which applications can help answer that question and which ones can't, and then actually open up those applications themselves. So there's a lot going on the screen, but I'll walk you through it. On the right-hand side, this is a representation of what an FDC3 application directory would look like. It's got, again, natural language descriptions, written out sentences of what an application can do, a registry of the intents or actions that that application can do, and the context that it can handle. So in this case, our LLM or our chat interface is saying, I found 4 applications matching your request. Let's go ahead and open them. And so this could be a single application that's opened. It could be multiple applications that are opened. In this case, I'm representing a dashboard or a workspace that has been opened with multiple applications together. And again, you've got the context that we were talking about, the client, the instrument, et cetera. So you're working in those the existing application estate that you've already invested a lot of time building in as an organization. So why does this matter? I like this pattern a lot for several reasons. The first is that it's actually relatively cheap to run this. And again, this talk is not trying to be around token optimization for large language models, but you're going to run into that reality pretty quickly when you're rolling out these systems to tens of thousands of employees. If you pull the entire portfolio into the context window of a large language model, you are going to be burning tokens. The universal remote pattern here actually just routes you back to an existing application. You're not using the context window of the LLM apart from selecting the applications. From a governance and risk perspective, you also end up avoiding many conversations, which can, depending on your organization's posture, be very important. So because you're not sending PII or proprietary information to the context window of the large language model, you don't really have to worry about if your data is being used for training and other considerations. Probably more importantly to me in this pattern is that for the end user, this is safe and trusted. I don't have to worry about hallucinations. I don't have to worry about if the information is accurate. I have a level of comfort with the existing applications and the way that my designers and the enterprise have built out these applications, and I'm doing work inside of those applications. I didn't have to find them. They've got the right context. I can just pick up work as I normally would. All right, so the third pattern, and this is an emerging one, and it's based on a new standard which arrived earlier this year, which is MCP apps. So instead of pulling in this wall of text into a chat conversation, you can actually have, as an application owner, an interactive application defined as the tool return in the MCP standard. What does that look like in practice? In this case, again, I'm asking, show me Tesla live pricing, maybe some of the Greeks associated with it. And you can immediately see that that live, rich, interactive application contains much more information than a wall of text could. It's got trended information. It's updating for real-time pricing. And this feels much more like a thoughtful experience that I would want to use as a consumer. This is in line in the chat experience. So I can continue the conversation from there. What's the 30-day trend for Tesla? Could return a different MCP app from a different application if necessary. But you quickly run into a problem. And my whole talk here is really about just thinking about being in the end user shoes when you're designing these experiences. That beautiful interactive application, as you continue the conversation, is nowhere to be seen. It is at the top of this chat conversation. You're going to be scrolling back and forth, trying to find it, getting that information. Again, this is magical when you see it the first time. It starts to break down in practice from an end user perspective. So we've been playing around with a couple of different patterns with our clients that we think are useful and potentially interesting here. And the first one is just to make an option where you don't have the MCP app return inline in a chat experience, but rather you drop it out into a workspace or a dashboard. And this doesn't require proprietary technology. You can use an open source library like Golden Layout or your favorite workspace creation tool. And so again, this is a much better experience than the first pattern we saw, which is pulling all this data into chat with a wall of text. I now have an interactive dynamic application sitting to the right of a conversation. If I leave this to go do work somewhere else, I can come back to it and I'll have my conversation, I'll have my interactive application, and I can still use large language models to actually ask questions of the data and application. So I call this pattern surface and application. Again, this is just coming online with the arrival of the MCP app standard, but I think it's got a lot of promise. All right, so kind of zooming back out, we covered a lot here, 3 different patterns. The one you're probably all familiar with, pull to chat. It's capable because of MCP of connecting to any application or data source. Really just think about that end user experience and also how much this is going to cost you in tokens. Navigate to source. If you've invested heavily in an application estate today and you're leveraging the FDC3 standard, I highly encourage you to explore this pattern. You can turn a chat interface and a large language model into a universal remote for your entire application estate, helping your users discover applications and getting work done quickly and safely today. And then if you're looking ahead, start thinking about what some of these more dynamic or interactive chat experiences could look like, but also fundamentally where the chat experience falls down in practice. So at the risk of looking around corners that I don't have any different information than you do, I am going to take a look at where I think this pattern's going in the future, the generative UI spectrum. So today we're talking about new standards like MCP apps, but even these, as cool as they are really about predefined user interfaces. The application owner defined what they wanted that interface or that widget to look like. New standards like A2UI will allow AI on the fly to create a dynamic user interface that's based on your needs and your intents. So I call that a declarative UI. You can provide a component library, your UI, your branding. That'll be a much better experience. And then the frontier of where we're going is, let's go back to that pull to chat example. We got data from 4 different applications. That data has never resided together in a single front-end visualization. Using A2UI, you could imagine an ephemeral dynamic application being created to show that data side by side. So I think that's the direction of travel where everybody's going. So the desktop is changing. I think that's very clear. The operating model, because of AI, has started to dynamically change. I think the worst thing you could do right now is simply bolt chatbots onto the side of single applications, or worse, leave them as RAG-based retrieval on top of a knowledge base. The chat interface isn't going to disappear, but I think as you go back to your organizations, you've got a lot of opportunities to think about what's the actual experience for the end user as you're deploying AI through chat interfaces alongside your existing application estate. So I hope this was interesting and some insights from the field. Please let me know if you want to continue the conversation. I'll be around all day. Thanks so much for your time. All right, I had a question in the back. So I guess a lot of what I've shown is predicated on a strong FDC3 implementation. I think fortunately, most folks here today have probably heard of that standard, but that's the unlock for me in these patterns. Having your application estate well-defined, metadata-rich, intense-defined context. So I guess the short answer would be implement FDC3 and everything gets a lot easier, in my opinion. No, okay. All right, thanks everyone, appreciate the time.